Welcome to my video chat room. Yes, well, it is a room. It's my terrace. On this day, it's rather chilly, so I'm, well, chilly. Not compared to where some of you might be, but it's a little chilly. And look, let me tell you that the story today is about a rock legend, or a pop legend. And I thought, well, I'll get me pop star look, if you know what I mean, for the story. The story is about how I met Cliff Richard, or should I say, Sir Cliff Richard. Now, let me go back in time. The very first concert that I ever went to was of course, in Dublin. I don't know what age I was. I was very, very young. I must have been 10, 8, 9, around that age, whatever. And I had an Irish tutor. Well, let me put it another way. He was an Irish to teach. He was teaching me Irish. The only word I learned, God, I was terrible, was Ugus, which means and that was it. His name was Harry Lush, but he was my tutor. And I think I must have been 8 or 9. And Harry Lush was also the manager of the Adelphi Cinema. And the Adelphi Cinema was famous for putting on concerts as well as the big, films of the time. Anyway, so this time, Cliff Richard. Now, when I don't know what age I was, but I got a present of an album of Cliff Richard's. I remember the cover was just him there, and I loved the songs that were out at the time, especially the young ones. I went to see the movie of the young ones with my grandmother and grandfather in the Green Cinema on Stephen's Green in Dublin. And cinemas in those days, I don't know what they're like now in Dublin, but they had restaurants, and quite well-known restaurants. So we'd always have it was a Saturday night, we'd always have something to eat, and then we would watch the film. And the film was The Young Ones with Cliff Richard. And I always remember the screaming in the theatre every time he was on the screen was amazing. My grandmother didn't know much about it. She fell asleep, she always does. But I was amazed by it. And I think at that moment, that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to become Cliff Richard. This was even before the Beatles, as you know. Anyway, so that's the sort of thing. Then Harry Lush, who was the manager of the Adelphi Cinema, they were staging the Cliff Richard's visit to Dublin. I think it was probably one of his first visits to Dublin. And I wanted to see it, and my parents arranged through Harry Lush that I would go to the show. Not only did I watch Cliff Richard on the stage and fall totally in love with the idea of becoming a pop star, but also I went backstage and I met him there and we chatted. I was a child and we chatted for a while, but I was smitten. That was it. I didn't want to be a doctor like Mum and Dad. All I wanted to be was Cliff Richard. All I wanted to be was a rock star, nothing else. You see, the leather, it's all here, the gear, the look, it's all here. Anyway, let's progress a good bit, a really good bit. Let's leave Dublin, let's fly to Spain, let's move into Marbella, let's get on radio, etc., etc. And somehow, I can't remember how, I heard that Sir Cliff Richard is going to appear, sort of a private gala function in La Manga down in Costa Blanca. So somehow, I don't know how now, but someone arranged that I would meet him and I would interview him. So this was very exciting for me, because going back to all those years I told you, I was smitten by him. So I went to La Manga. It was arranged that his manager would meet me, and then his manager would introduce me to Sir Cliff, and we would have a 10-minute maximum. That's what I was allowed, a 10-minute maximum interview. Anyway, he played a tennis tournament. I always remember Jasper Carrott was there at the time, as well as other celebrities, because there was a celebrity golf tournament at the exact same time. And Cliff was scheduled then to appear with Elaine Page that night at the prize giving in the ballroom, where there was a big function on, which I was delighted I was going to be invited to. Anyway, so Cliff was playing a tennis match. Now, he was playing with the David Lloyd. He was the professional coach there. David Lloyd, of course you do. David Lloyd, and Jasper was playing with someone else. I can't remember who. We were playing doubles. Oh, and you know, there was so many fans that followed from England. His fans are just absolutely their life, is Sir Cliff. Do you know, when he plays in the Royal Albert Hall, they camp out for a week on the pavement of those tents for a week, waiting to get tickets. Anyway, so going to the tennis tournament, I remember Sir Cliff, Jasper, he was very funny, but Cliff takes it very serious. Jasper had a let. You know what that is? When the ball hits the net, but it goes over and you win the point normally. And I remember, sorry, it wasn't Jasper. It was Cliff that had the let. And Jasper was complaining about it. And he goes over and he said, Cliff, there's nothing in the Bible about getting the let and winning your point. It was very funny. He was funny the whole way through it. Anyway, I remember afterwards they auctioned for charity Cliff's his tracksuit, and one of the fans that had followed from England, they were just ordinary people, bought the tracksuit for about £5,000. And I remember going over to her, asking her, in fact, I think I interviewed a few of the fans. I said, that's very expensive. She said, I know, I can't even afford it. I have to scrape the money just for it, but I don't want anyone else to have it. I want Cliff's tracksuit. Anyway, so then the schedule for the interview was to take place. And Cliff turned up in the room allotted for the interview. He turned up in his, I think he was in his tennis gear from what I remember. And I sat down. Now, his manager put his head around the corner and he said to me, remember, Maurice, maximum 10 minutes. And I don't like to be told how long I should have, shouldn't have, what I should say, what I shouldn't say, etc., etc., etc. But I do remember one thing that I was warned against, but I didn't listen. I was going down. Now, Wendy, my wife, very, very, very rarely attends any of my interviews or any stage shows or anything like that. It's not really an interest to her. But she did say, I'd like to come, like I suppose most women, I'd like to come to the Cliff Richard interview. And I said, of course you can come, with pleasure. Anyway, we went down and we were in the lift, I think, and Wendy was making her way to the allotted place for the interview. And Wendy said to me, you're not going to ask him, are you? I said, pardon? You're not going to ask him? I said, well, of course I'll ask him. She said, but it's nobody's business. Now, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? You do. Well, I'll tell you as we get to it. And I said, I don't care. It's a question so many people have asked all through Cliff's career. And I'm going to ask it too. But the problem is that very few people actually asked Cliff himself. So, but I'm going to ask him. It was set. So anyway, 10 minutes. I said, fine. But I had a little plan that maybe gives me more time with Sir Cliff. My plan was that I would start on the religious thing before we start recording. So I told Cliff that I was Jewish. And at that moment, Cliff immediately warmed to me. And he started talking about, his belief in Judaism through Jesus Christ himself as a Jew, and et cetera, et cetera. We were chatting, I think, for about 10 minutes before we start recording. And the manager put his head in again and he said, are you finished? And it was Sir Cliff then that said, look, I'm doing this interview with Maurice. We haven't even started, but please leave it at that. So the manager went out with his head between his tail and he left. And then we started the interview. And we're chatting away. And he was telling me about a new record that he has coming out called The Millennium Prayer. I don't know if you remember that. And this record almost cost him his career, his recording career. And you remember, it's the God's Prayer, what you call it, the Lord's Prayer, isn't it? Our Father, which art in... And he starts singing it to me a cappella in the studio, and I thought, oh my God, this sounds terrible. But the song, I mean, what's he doing with this? It was for Christmas. Anyway, it didn't go down well, as you'll know afterwards, when Chris Evans from Virgin Radio banned the song, banned Cliff Richard, and a few other stations refused to play it. Saying that Cliff was setting him up as the Lord himself or something. I didn't like the song. I didn't like the idea of the song, but obviously, I just said, that's lovely. But we got to the point, and I saw Wendy was sort of staring daggers at me, thinking, don't do it. And I got to the point then when I said to Sir Cliff, I said, listen, Cliff, are you fed up being called gay? So it was a sort of a funny way of saying it, isn't it? I didn't actually call him gay. I didn't ask him, was he gay? I just asked him, was he fed up being called gay? Interesting answer. He said, look, Maurice, he said, I'm not going to get married for the sake of my fans. I'll get married when I find someone that I love. He didn't say man or woman, but he said he had 3 major affairs in his life. And from what I remember, there was Sue Barker, there was Una Stubbs, and there was some German girl who'd been living in his house. But that's all I know. He then went on with the next questions. So he never answered it directly or indirectly, just saying he's not going to get married until he finds someone he loves, not for the sake of his fans. And that was that. So the interview went on quite a while, more than the time allotted. But the manager never showed his head again. And that night, Cliff did an amazing concert. It was quite an intimate concert. It was him on stage, and then Elaine Page came out and they did a duet together. But all he had was a guitar. That's all he had. And all he had to do, I remember, it was amazing. He only had to do, for example, the guitar went boom, 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 boom. And the 300 people, and most of them were celebrities, because I told you it was a celebrity, all start singing, got yourself a crying, talking, sleep. Cliff didn't, he could have gone home. And then he talked about being a bachelor, and then everyone said, hey, a bachelor boy. And it was fantastic. I know that people look at Cliff now and think he's a bit over the top, but let me tell you something about Sir Cliff. He will play the Royal Albert Hall again. He's 83, I think, years old. He's just done his calendar again. He has, and that's seemingly another sellout. The Royal Albert Hall will sell out. He once sold out the Royal Albert Hall for a month, I think. He's hugely popular, but the radio are not playing him. The radio are not playing him. He recorded a white label. In the business, a white label is like I don't know what you call it. It's got no name on it, nothing. And he presented that, or no, he didn't, but his people presented it at the radio station under a pseudonym, another name. And it was a hit, but it was Sir Cliff. He sort of tricked them into playing it. But you very rarely hear Cliff Richard records on the radio now. And he made some classics. To me, The Young Ones was the thing. And I loved the movies. Very rarely played on television on repeats. But I think it was a fabulous movie. Come on, he's not Shakespeare. He's not what do you call it? He was a good actor. Anyway, he told me, I remember saying to him, I said, Cliff, I know why you have no wrinkles. This is, actually, he's got a little older looking now at 83 or 84, but he still looks great. But I remember saying to him then, I know why you've got no wrinkles. You've got no worries. You're not married and you've got no children. And he said, well, I have nephews and nieces. I said, now, Cliff, come on, nephews and nieces, it's not the same thing. And we laughed. So we started having a good laugh together, He was coming from Portugal, I think. He had a home in Portugal, and he was coming from there, and we talked a bit about his vineyard and his wine, and et cetera, et cetera. He's a lovely guy, a lovely person, The only thing is that from a very, very, very early age, like 16 or 17, he was famous. He didn't have to, like the Beatles, play Germany and rough it up in the cavern and do the whole apprenticeship. He became famous very quickly on a show called The 6-5 Special, if you remember it, with Marty Wilde and Joe Brown. And the Vernon Girls, you remember them? And that was all how Cliff became, I think it was in the Three Eyes or something, and the Shadows as well, so his backing band. So honestly, I think that England should be much prouder than Cliff than they are now. Cliff was the English answer to Elvis. But I hope you enjoyed that little story. And I look forward to coming back. And there's two things that I want to do. I want to do part 2 of my embarrassing moments because I forgot 3 or 4 of them. And the other thing I want to do is the story. I've been asked about it, the story of the 3 Wishes, the movie script that I wrote. But this is Cliff, and this is me. Or that's Cliff, and this is me. And I hope you enjoyed that little bit here from my little video room and chat room, I think we call it. Speak to you later.